Hi, welcome to Performance Stories. I'm John Mulcahy, Director of Sports Science Agency. Today I'm joined by Alex Skelton, my fellow director, and also Tom Brownlee. Tom's a lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University and he did his PhD with Liverpool Football Club. Today we're going to take a slightly different tact in that mental fatigue has become a hot topic both in sport and across society as a whole. Unfortunately for us, Tom has recently published a paper on the topic of mental fatigue. So we're going to ask him a few questions and see what we can draw out of that from a marketing and sponsorship side. Before we start, how are you both? Alex, you okay?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, John. Very good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thank you. Tom, things going all right?
I'm very well, thanks, John. Thanks for asking.
Good. So Tom, your paper looked at mental fatigue in under 23 players, so in Premier League 2. So they're all professionals. Could you just give us a quick overview of what you found?
Yeah, so what we did with the players was on the morning of a match, the day after a match, the day after that, and the day after that, essentially, we gave them a questionnaire to answer, which was a validated questionnaire where we had tacked on a final question, which was, how mentally fatigued do you feel? And then the way they answered this question was there was a scale and they had to basically do a line across a horizontal line anchored at sort of very mentally fatigued or not at all mentally fatigued. And we looked at how their responses changed throughout the season in response to their match result and also in response to, and we also sort of correlated that with how they were feeling with other sort of typical wellness markers such as muscle fatigue, how well they slept, those kinds of things, which are quite commonly asked in clubs.
And what did you feel were the key outcomes or the main recommendations from the paper?
Well, I mean, the key outcomes were that mental fatigue was highest the day after a game, or what we would call match day +1, which you might think is logical. We also found that mental fatigue was lowest towards the end of the season, which we might have thought was a bit of a surprise. But when we looked into the match results of this team, actually that's when they were having their most successful period of the season. So what we term to be late season, they actually had a win rate of 80%. So rather than attributing that to sort of where they were in the season, we sort of linked that to match results and sort of found that perhaps unsurprisingly, the more successful the team were, the less mentally fatigued they felt as a result.
And Tom, taking a step back, what is mental fatigue?
That's a good question. It's quite difficult to define, even though I'm sure it's something that we've all experienced at one time or another. Broadly, it's the reduced ability to perform any kind of tasks, be that cognitive or behavioural or physical, perhaps in this sense. And it's you associate it typically with feelings of demotivation or lethargy that you might not always be able to associate physically. Physically you might be feeling fine, but there's just something which isn't quite clicking that could be a result of something like mental fatigue.
And how do we see that manifest in a performance point of view?
Well, as I say, I mean, it can be anything right across the board, really. And I think if we're talking about football, it could be something technical, like your ability to be able to deliver across in the way you want, or even a tactical understanding from that cognitive impairment. So it could be really any part of your game that's affected by it.
And taking this out into the broader world, Alex, we've heard quite a lot about mental fatigue with the likes of Obama and Mark Zuckerberg. So it is a hot topic. How do you think it does translate into the wider world?
Well, I think there's probably a subtle definition difference between what's talked about with Zuckerberg and Obama, in that mostly people were talking about decision fatigue, and then reducing the number of decisions that they make in their day-to-day lives so that they can put more effort into the ones that are important. That manifests itself with Zuckerberg always wearing a grey t-shirt and Obama a dark suit and having the same snack every evening while he was the US president. But when it's all wrapped up into one, it's exactly the same principle, where the more fatigued you are, that manifests itself physically and mentally in terms of your ability to perform physically and also your ability to continue to make the right decisions, which I think is just what Tom was saying.
And mentally, we hear a lot about this becoming the kind of era of psychology and sports science. So do you think that more research around things like mental fatigue is going to open up more opportunities for clubs and sponsors to create content, or are they a little bit behind the curve at the moment?
Well, I think that there's a huge opportunity because people are interested in it. The fact that we know about decision fatigue and mental fatigue from the likes of Zuckerberg and Obama, and yet we probably don't know that much about it from a sporting perspective. It means that there's an opportunity to tell that story a little bit better. And I think one of the things that you often see in the press is, well, these players are getting paid an awful lot of money every week to play football. Why do they need a rest? Why can't they just carry on and play day after day? But actually, I would think about that in a slightly different way. And I would think, if you're paying someone that much money, you need to make sure that every penny, you're getting the best out of every penny that you're spending. So you need to put in place everything that you need in order to minimize the negative effects of mental fatigue and maximize their performance on the pitch.
And Tom, was there much of an individual response to this, or did players sort of react in quite a similar way?
No, I think across the board we did see similar patterns, but you're absolutely right to ask that question. And I think whenever we look at any research, we do see people responding in different ways. And I think if I was a practitioner reading this paper, I probably would draw some conclusions from it, and it might affect my practice. But I think if you've got enough pairs of hands, then you would probably look at things in a slightly more individual way to understand how different people respond. Because we know our research kind of showed that mental fatigue was lowest when a team won, but I'm sure that there would be some players who would be equally motivated by a loss, perhaps as they would be, motivated by a win. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It is very individual.
And Tom, your research was with academy players or under 23 players. How do you think that your findings can be extrapolated out into the first team?
I think that they were, as you said, they were under 23 players. I think the average age was just over 20 years old. So there are younger players who are playing in first teams for sure. But I guess that a lot of the potential mental fatigue or anxiety much more broadly for these younger players is around securing contracts. I mean, as John said, the majority of these will be professional, that's for sure. But, they might be on 1-year deals, looking for clubs elsewhere, looking to push for the first team. So I think the short answer is it would probably still be quite individual. And I think that the slightly more complex answer would be that it would probably depend on a lot of things. I mean, if you're a club who is safely in the top 4, for example, with 2 games to play, your mental fatigue following a loss might not be as high as if you were, about to fall into the drop zone and be relegated. So it's probably very dependent upon the situation that the players and the clubs find themselves in.
So then, Alex, taking that a step further, I guess, is this a platform to actually create quite interesting and insightful content around clubs through different phases of the season?
Definitely. I think as we've said before, there's a great deal of interest about what happens behind the closed doors of the training ground. And by creating that content, you're just feeding fans knowledge and awareness. And also, more knowledgeable fans are better fans, better educated to understand the requirements of the team and the players. And I think that goes to the point of, if you have a different schedule based on a win or a loss in the day and the 2 days after a game, then that makes for interesting content. Understanding why that is the case, understanding how to cope with the different demands of mental fatigue after a loss or a win, especially in a losing streak or a winning streak, just is interesting topic for most people who follow football. And hopefully it'll also educate fans to have a little bit more empathy with the players to make sure that they're getting the best out of them.
Following on from that as well, I think that the important thing here, in as far as you guys might be concerned, isn't necessarily the findings of the paper. Does this apply to my team? Does this apply to senior players? but it's just an awareness about this kind of undulation of those feelings and what kind of variables might affect that. And then, as Alex says, that can really sort of bring in interesting content and potentially be something that people hadn't considered before. Because the thing that we were quite pleased with as a research team is, we're not psychologists, but we're aware of the importance of that multidisciplinary team nature. And, we're starting to see more research now that's pulling in from S&C to psychology to the tactical periodization. And I think that as the research does that, so can the marketing side of it. And that will only be really interesting, because it won't just be silos of, oh, here's somebody in the gym, oh, here's somebody doing their training on the grass. But it's just the kind of layers of the detail around it, which, diehard fans, I think, will be really interested to hear about.
And one of the videos that we've created in the past was talking about how to create content with the performance team and the players. Now, based on this research, how much do you think that should inform the process of creating content to make sure you're doing it at the right time? Because historically, probably the days with the most time available are the days immediately after a match. But actually, that might not be the best time for the players to be doing something unrelated.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think if you've just lost a cup final 4-0 and someone, I'd hate to be the marketing guy who's got to go in and interview the manager the day after that, for example. That interview is probably not going to happen regardless. But no, I think to have some kind of awareness around that kind of stuff, to maybe think about how much you might be asking of players and staff, if you had an awareness, then that could be really useful for sure.
I think, Alex, actually, what a lot of this conversation comes back to is an understanding, as Tom said, of the holistic view of all that, and realising what's going on in the club and being able to pull out those stories rather than just talking about a topic in isolation, actually to drive fans forward in their understanding. It's about a more holistic view of how training influences lifestyle, how lifestyle influences the mental fatigue, etc., etc. So do you think it really is about pulling it all together to be able to get across the quality of message?
Absolutely. And I think that the scope for sponsors and partners around training in football especially is massive. The one thing that we see in other sports is during periods of fatigue, heightened pressure, we see the nutritionists will be changing the players' diets, giving them a few more, higher calorie treats. And now, if you can link that type of holistic approach where you're talking about, what is the recovery that they're doing on the day after a win versus the day after a loss? What impact does it have on the nutrition strategy? What impact does it have on, the actual training sessions? Then I think that you're giving fans a much better understanding of what football is and what the teams are doing to get the best out of the players.
So that's the end of our time. Thanks both. Tom, in particular, thanks for sharing that insight and your latest research. Alex, I guess thanks for showing how those findings can be used across the sponsorship, across sponsorship and marketing. One thing you said really resonated with me, and that was that more knowledgeable fans make better fans. I think that just sums up the value in being able to tell a credible performance story, be that via a sponsor or because we've been talking about football through the club itself. So if you'd like to know more about how Sports Science Agency helps brands, rights holders, or our agency partners, feel free to get in touch. If you just search Sports Science Agency, you'll find our web pages or our LinkedIn page. You can follow us on Twitter via @SportsSci-Agency. Or if you want, just drop us an email. It's info@sportscienceagency.com. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye.